Let's pick up on chapter 4. Jesus makes a retreat into the desert to fast for 40 days and 40 nights. This chapter is centered around Satan's temptation of Jesus. Specifically, Satan tempts Jesus 3 times. 1, to turn stones into bread. 2, to jump off of a temple and let angels save him, as he's trying to convince him to have faith that the angels would save him. And 3, Satan is also saying, worship me and I will give you the world. Jesus tells Satan to be gone and begins his ministry in Capernaum. He echoes the same narrative of chapter 3, do penance for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. By the end of the chapter, in verses 18 and 19, he calls a set of brothers, Peter and Andrew, and he uses the famous phrase, you will become fishers of men. A little ironic since they were actually fishermen, more on that later. And then he calls another pair of brothers, James and John. Okay, let's break some of this down. We often get a little mixed up in our language where it says that Jesus was tempted by Satan. I don't want you to think of Jesus being tempted by Satan as him being tempted to sin, like maybe we are tempted to sin. A better synonym would be tested by Satan. Satan was giving him test. Now let me talk about the first miracle. When Satan tells Jesus, turn these stones into bread, we may think on a human level, he's trying to tell Jesus, hey, you're hungry, satisfy your hunger by turning these stones into bread. But that's not really the temptation. Again, the center of all sin is pride. What he's trying to do is to get Jesus to be prideful, to demonstrate that he actually can turn the stone into bread. It has less to do with hunger and more to do with being prideful, which of course Jesus is not. The second temptation, Satan quotes scripture and he says, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will give his angels charge of you, and on the hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. Now Jesus says something really powerful that we need to take note of. Again it is written, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. I love that repartee of scripture versus scripture. But if you're going to listen to anyone in this situation, listen to Jesus. Do not tempt the Lord. That is not our job. Our job is to obey the Lord, not tempt him. Now, let's fast forward to the end of the chapter as Jesus finally calls some of the early disciples. He's calling a pair of brothers, fishermen, and they're out with their father fishing. This tells us a couple of things. One is these people are probably on the younger side. Not children, but not like in their 40s or 50s. So they're probably fairly young and healthy. 2, if he's calling a set of fishermen, these are the most average jobs you could have. Kind of average Joe for its time. And remember, when Jesus is getting his disciples, his group of 12, and then, his apostles, his group of 12, and later his disciples, the vast majority of these people are regular people. And there's a really good chance, like you and me, that most of us listening are regular people. But just because they're ordinary people, they're not biblical scholars or even scholars in the Old Testament. Their role in his kingdom is important, just like your role is important and my role is important. So he calls a couple of sets of brothers. The names you're going to hear a lot of down the road would be the name of Peter and the name of John. There's, of course, John is the writer of the Gospel of John and of Revelation and maybe the epistles. Let's talk about the number 40. Jesus spent 40 days in the desert praying and fasting. Now, if you've read any of the Old Testament, you probably have encountered the number 40. It's often used to symbolize a period of preparation and transformation. For example, during the flooding of Noah's Ark, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Moses fasted for 40 days and 40 nights while receiving the law on Mount Sinai. Of course, we have the example of Jesus himself. And finally, Israel was wandering in the desert for 40 years after the Exodus. So the number 40 is significant in the Bible. So look out for it next time you're flipping through the pages. Alright, we'll leave it at that for today. Hope to see you guys next week. Do remember that Christ is Lord and rejoice, because chapter 5 really does take off with Jesus' teaching. God bless.